Sometimes in a survey, you're using a scale made up of several questions. That means that you then need to take the mean of those several questions. So there are a lot of scales out there that have been designed and already tested in academic papers so that the mean of several items, an item we just mean question, is analysed. So we take the mean, and the mean of all those questions is what we put into the statistical test. Sometimes before calculating that mean, some of the items need to be reverse coded. So I'm going to demonstrate in SPSS what reverse coding is and what that means. I'll use a study which you can look at if you go to the VLE, where you find this workshop, which is a salary study to print out on paper. Here we've asked the question, please answer these questions on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is strongly agree and 5 is strongly disagree. Now, let's imagine I'm a person that's very happy in my work. Well, don't have to imagine, I am very happy. But the way I'm going to answer these questions is different for some of the questions that are phrased negatively. So I am happy to go to work in the morning. I'm going to strongly agree with that and put a 1. I enjoy talking to my colleagues, 1. But when I get down to I do not derive satisfaction from my job, I'm going to put 5 because that's strongly disagree. 1 for this, 1 for this. When I wake up, I dread going to work. I'm going to put a 5, I strongly disagree. And a 1 for that and a 1 for that. Now, when we take the mean of all those numbers for me as a respondent, it's going to include those negative answers. So what we need to do is flip the scale for those negative answers. So in order to flip the scales, we need to identify which ones it is we need to reverse code. So let's see, when I wake up, I dread going to work. We need to reverse code that one. And I do not derive satisfaction from my job. So that's no satisfaction and dread. To do this, we've got 2 options. We can either replace the numbers that are in there already, so replace the numbers that are in the column, or what I like to do is create a new column just so that I don't mess around with my original data, but it is up to you. To reverse code, we go to transform, recode into a different column because I want to create a new column. And then I'm going to choose the question that I want to reverse code. So this no satisfaction one. And I need to put a name for the new column. So I'm going to put no satisfaction reversed and click change. Then I need to tell it what the old values are and new values are. So in this case, if someone answered 1 to that question, I want it to be recoded as 5. So I'm going to add that. 2 becomes 4. 3 stays the same. 4 becomes 2. And if someone's answered 5, I want that to be a 1. Click continue and OK. If I go to my data view, at the end of my data, you can see that I've now got this new column which is no satisfaction reversed. And let's just check that that's right. It's reverse coded in the second respondent's answer to 5. So their original response should be a 1. Let's take a look just to check. There we go. No satisfaction, and it's a 1. So that's worked. And then I would repeat that for the dread here. Once I've done my reverse coding, I could then take the mean of all those items. But we have to be careful what we're taking the mean of, because sometimes people create these scales so that there's subscales within them. So if you're using someone else's scale, please make sure that you know which questions are used to make up those subscales before you use it. If you've excluded questions or you've adapted the questions, you may need to look at the reliability of that scale that you've adapted, because the way someone has tested it before then won't be applicable to your study if you've sort of changed the scale. So I've used a scale that someone else has used in the questionnaire academic motivation. So I use these questions to get a measure of academic motivation. So I'm using this table to show me which questions go into which subscales. For example, I've got 4 questions which are external regulation. Let me magnify that for you. You can see, because with only a high school degree I would not find a high paying job later on, is external regulation. So is in order to obtain a more prestigious job later on, and because I want the good life later on. And the other one is in order to have a better salary. So it's those 4 questions, those 4 items that I'm going to take the mean of to get a subscale of external regulation, and that's a type of academic motivation. So in this data from my academic motivation questionnaire, I need to identify where those 4 questions are, because they're the ones I'm going to take the mean of. Now, to calculate a mean, I'm going to go to transform and compute variable. And this is going to create a new column at the end of my data. I'm going to call it external regulation, because that's the name of the subscale. And then I'm going to use a function which is mean. To get that function, I'm going to click on all under the function group and scroll down to M for mean. If I double click, it will jump up into the expression box. And I'm then going to replace these question marks with the answers to those items that make up that external regulation subscale. So I need to have this one. Oh, let me delete that question mark. There's a comma between each of the questions. Then I need, in order to obtain, check a more prestigious job. If I hover over it, I can see a full thing. I'm going to add another comma. Then I want, because I want to have a good life after, another comma, and then my final question will be further down, I think, in order to have a better salary later on. I click OK, and if I go to my data view, and at the end of all my data, I've got this new column which is external regulation, and it's those numbers that I probably put into statistical analysis. So that's if you're using someone else's scale. Now, if you're using your own scale, it's one you've came up with. So for instance, in our salary study, these are just questions that I've came up with to try and measure how happy someone is in their job or not. But I might need to test that scale to see if all those questions are actually measuring the same thing, or whether some of the questions are measuring something different. To do that, I could look at something called Cronbach's alpha, and that comes up with a number to suggest how good the scale is. The other way of doing it is putting it into an analysis called a factor analysis, which groups your questions into subscales depending on how people have answered them.